I always want to see how people perform at their worst. A lot of people outsource as like a knee-jerk reaction, right? Like, I don't want to do this thing. I don't know how to do this thing. I'm going to hire somebody to do it. That's the backwards way of approaching this. The ancient Greeks used to say, discuss every idea twice, once while you're drunk and once while you're sober. If they match up, then you can do it. I went for a colonoscopy last year for the first time in 10 years. The doctor's going through my history and I say, like, I had Crohn's disease, and he's like, what do you mean you had Crohn's disease? I had it. I don't have it anymore.
Through the process of fixing yourself physically, what tests did you do routinely and what actions did you do to correct that? Ari Meisel, thank you so much for showing up, man. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Brad. It's always fun to have a fun conversation. We've already doing it. So.
Yes, we are. We've started a while ago, apparently. You're an interesting cat to me because you biohacked your way out of Crohn's disease. You then proceeded to go run an Ironman in France, which is some evidence of Crohn's being less of an issue in your world. This led you to this journey of efficiency in business and in life in general. You launched a VA company that served hundreds of clients. I've got 15 different directions I want to go with you, but I'm going to start with a couple quick ones, which is, what is the worst mistake that entrepreneurs consistently make when they're trying to deploy a VA in their business?
Oh, that's a great one. Cool. Okay. So I thought you were going to give hard questions. So
we'll get there.
So, I mean, it's actually, it's symptomatic of the sort of the bigger issues that I think in general, like some of the bigger issues you see with entrepreneurs, but a lot of it comes down to ego and this idea that like only I can do the thing, right? So that is a very insidious and very sort of pervasive way that they think through all the things that they do, where it's like some of it's about trust, some of it's about a lack of knowledge, and honestly, at the end of the day, some of it is a lack of mastery, right? Because I would argue that, if you can teach something, then you have some level of mastery of it, right? A lot of people would say that. Every time when I used to do a lot of speaking in person, right, and before COVID, of course, and like I've spoken in I think like 15 countries at this point, and lots and lots of stages. And I always love to ask people, raise your hand if you've ever outsourced something. And you'll get a large percentage of people raising their hands, and more over the years. I've been doing this for like 15 years. And then I'm like, all right, now if you've ever had a bad experience outsourcing something, raise your hand. And invariably, more people raise their hands than originally raised their hands for the question, right? So it's like, all right, so to be clear, more of you have had a bad experience outsourcing than have actually outsourced something. Got it. I was like, so here's the good news. It was probably your fault because people are not natural-born communicators. Some people might be natural-born leaders. I do not think people are naturally-born communicators. You really have to, it's a skill we really have to learn. And what always happens with outsourcing is that people approach it, if they're not good at it, they approach it with a very binary kind of attitude, which is that either this is a thing that I have to do completely on my own, or this is a thing that somebody else completely has to do on their own. It's very binary. And so neither of those is a very comfortable scenario to live in. And what they end up doing is they ask somebody to do something. They give it to somebody who has less information and less context than they do, just by design, while at the same time expecting a superior result than they would have delivered themselves. You are like guaranteeing you're setting somebody up for failure. And then what happens is that people then have a bad taste in their mouth about outsourcing. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. It's like, yeah, I tried that, but this happened.
So I think that pertains to all delegation in business, period, right? Like, yes. As you go through the phases of, having one employee to having 5 to 10 to 30 to millions or whatever, right? There are different levels of how you need to effectively delegate and how you have to learn to delegate. With virtual assistants in particular, is there a consistent mistake that people make around that? Do you need more framework with VAs? Do you need specific types of tasks? What's the common pitfall for entrepreneurs when they're first doing it?
Yeah, so outsourcing first. That's the big problem. So it's not a particularly issue. It's not particularly an issue with a VA. I think you definitely want to have tighter systems with VAs. Not so much because they're remote, but because kind of like by definition, they're a little interchangeable. And I'm not dehumanizing people, but just like the role of a VA kind of by design is, swappable, right? You should be able to have somebody else fill in that role.
Yeah. So you're going to tell me your framework, and I want to tee this up a little bit because one of the things that I like about how you approach, and I think that this is necessary. But one of the things I like about how you approach efficiency is by these sort of building blocks or frameworks that people can follow, like a structure to approach how to be efficient. Elon Musk has a framework for, it's like his algorithm framework is, I think, what he calls it, but it's question every requirement, delete unnecessary steps, optimize, accelerate cycle time, and automate process. And he's got kind of interesting thoughts about why he does that. You have a similar structure that is optimize, automate, outsource. And I think where you were going just now was people outsource first instead of those first two steps. So tell me the importance of that structure and that framework for you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So a lot of people outsource as like a knee-jerk reaction, right? Like, I don't want to do this thing. I don't know how to do this thing. This is annoying. It takes too much time. I'm going to hire somebody to do it. That's the backwards way of approaching this, right? So with mine, it's optimize first. You need to optimize the actual problem. And a lot of optimizing is actually understanding it. There's so much of things that we do just because that's how we've always done them. And we don't have a really deep understanding of why. And where you see that the most, and I'll come back to this in a moment, but where you see that the most is when people try to write down or create processes. They skip over all the heuristics and all the shortcuts in their brain that they aren't even aware that they're using, and then the other person doesn't have the information. So we have to optimize the actual problem first, because if you give an inefficient problem to somebody else to deal with, it's like sweeping the dirt under the rug, right? Like, it doesn't actually make it go away, and it just builds up, because then that person, again, doesn't have the knowledge, resources. It doesn't work. And then the next step, once you've optimized, then we want to look at automation. And automation now, especially with AI, is stuff we can automate things that, weeks ago, a person had to do. You can have done with a free bot or a free agent on ChatGPT. And the thing is if you give that work to a person that you could have had an AI do or something, you're in essence dehumanizing them. And they will not engage with that work. They will not do a good job on it. They will not enjoy it. There will be no sustainability to that. We want to optimize, then automate, and then what's left is the thing that we want to outsource to some sort of generalist or some sort of specialist, because that's something where they really need them. We need a human. We need that person with that skill set or that to be able to add that value to that, and they will be able to engage with that work in a better way as well.
I mean, we've got to jump into AI. So how has AI impacted the elements of outsourcing to a VA?
So over the years, I have personally worked with over 500 VAs in different capacities, in my own company and other companies in all sorts of different ways. I'm always trying to avoid outsourcing, right? So I want to optimize what I can, and I want to automate as much, or if all of it, if possible. So as much as I've tried to avoid outsourcing, I've still outsourced hundreds of thousands of dollars of things and thousands of hours of things, right? So that just shows you like how much there is. I have not had a VA or any kind of assistant with me in over 3 years now. And that is in large, not 3 years ago, but for the last couple of years at least, that is almost entirely because of using AI tools, primarily ChatGPT, but others as well. I'm involved in a lot of different things. I'm involved in municipal groups. I'm involved in a couple different charities. I have 5 children. ChatGPT is my external brain at this point. Now, I can't execute in the same way that a VA can, but it can get me right up to that point where I can just click a button.
It's March 18th, 2025. Have you played with Manus yet?
No. I just saw somebody post that they got access to it, and I didn't even know what it was.
Yeah. I mean, it's in this moment, it is and this is funny because when I'm recording podcast episodes, I'm sort of thinking about the general fundamental evergreen stuff that's going to exist forever. And I'm acutely aware of how clickbaity the topical trending stuff is, and how much I want to stay away from it, but like it's a curious point of discussion right now. So Manus is the first AI agent that people are really excited about and they're like really impressed with. And actually, you should be able to just sign up for it now. So it's invite only, but like I think that was their marketing hook on the front end, and they're it's opening up. Mm-hmm. Have you played with any agents?
Yeah, I mean, I've built stuff with Replit. I have what's the other one? Um, I'm blanking on what the other one was. I've done a bunch of stuff with Replit, but to be perfectly honest, like it's as valuable to me to be like, I have a leak in my house or something. Find these three plumbers and then like tell me which one I should call first, and then for me to make a call. Like I'm fine with that. I spend enough time in the car, like taking kids back and forth to school, like totally not a problem. Yeah, I could have a VA do that, but uh, it's like getting me to like the 3 yard line essentially, and that's totally
Mm-hmm.
fine because productivity is not all or nothing, right? Like, and there are things that you can learn through that process of being somewhat involved in things sometimes. The issue is if you really don't have the time or the bandwidth and you can't hand that over, that becomes a problem, and I'm not in that place because of how things are managed.
Yeah, you said something that's really interesting to me right now, which is productivity is not all or nothing, and by being involved, you can learn from the process. One of the things that I have seen consistently throughout, decades in business now is the frustration that comes from people, but employees in particular, that have been given a task, um, that you like given a project and then you don't use the output, or you seemingly don't use the output, right? So they're like, I did all this fucking work and you're not even gonna fucking use it. You're not even listening to me. And I think what you just said is so important for people to hear, which is the point may not be the output. The point might be that you got a better grip on the situation and understanding the steps, like how to optimize the process so that next time you do it, you're going to be much better. And it's not actually getting to the output right now. It's going through the exercise of learning. And I know that it sounds cliche that like, life is a journey or whatever, and it's about learning. It's not about the end, but truly, everything you do, if you put focus on it, will serve you in the next step. And that's a cool thing to think about relative to AI also.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's really about being more effective, right? And I'm pretty sure it's Tim Ferriss who said this a while ago, which was like productivity is producing more, efficiency is producing more with less, but being effective is producing the right things. And so
Mm.
there's no awards for being, I mean, I guess there are some maybe, but there's not really an award for like being the most productive. It just doing more doesn't doesn't have any sort of inherent meaning to it, right? It's really about doing the right things. And sometimes, a lot of times, figuring out what those right things are that's the hardest part. That's a lot of what I ultimately have to help people figure out with my coaching sometimes because of the ego aspect of that. But like, I could outsource so much more in my life. We could have a private chef, we could have a maid, we could have a driver, uh, but then so what? So that I could do more work. Like it's like, what are we optimizing for in some cases? I think about that image so often where it's like you get to this point where things are so optimized and uh, so automated, so streamlined, and like if you come up with an idea as an entrepreneur, you can give it to a system, and then that system creates it, and it goes into fruition. You can see that. It's like, well, so then what do you do? Well, go do the dishes. Like it's like that's what you do. You put your hands on something, and you do something tangible, and then again with the 5 kids, like if I'm lucky, I can spend a few minutes at the end of like the bedtime routine. Like I can go to each one for a few minutes, and talk about something. Like that's why we should be optimizing for these things so that we can do more of the things that seem mundane, but ultimately are the things that are really that are more real and make us more human.
Yeah, I think if you define productivity as producing more, which is sort of how you just defined it, right? It's
Yeah.
um, then who cares? Great, I produced more of what? But if you didn't produce to the outcome you want, then you didn't get there. Um, I like the delineation between productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness. That was good. Um, with a gaggle of kids, what are the efficiency tips that you have for parents that are also entrepreneurs?
Get better at sleeping less. um, so well, okay, so I mean there's all sorts of like kid things you could talk about and stuff, but I mean, so I have a 13-year-old, two 11 twin 11-year-olds, a 9-year-old, and a 22-month-old.
Whoa.
And yeah.
At what point do you stop counting months? Is it at the 2 year mark?
Yeah, I think so because it's like she's not 2 yet, she's still like my little baby. But then she'll be 2 very soon. Uh, you can talk about all things about like, uh, optimizing things in the house, I mean, everyone's got their own things. There's plenty of people on Instagram that can tell you that kind of stuff. I will tell you the number one thing that has been the silver bullet for me with productivity in general, if there was ever a silver bullet, is the exact opposite of what we're doing right now, which would be asynchronous communication. Right. So what we're doing right now is synchronous communication. We're live. We can see each other. We can react, and there's a place for that. And this is one of those places: is podcast interviews. The majority of meetings that people have, I believe, and argue and push clients that should be done asynchronously. So I would say that about 90% of my communication in life is done asynchronously. And you're all using asynchronous tools. You're using email and text and stuff, but a lot of people don't use them as asynchronous communication tools. They use them as like a leash that anybody can use to get a hold of them whenever they want. And that's not how it's supposed to work. So my general rule with people, because I get asked to do all sorts of things all the time and give my time for things, and my general rule is like, if we can do things 100% asynchronously, the answer is immediately, I'll say yes, yeah, no problem. If you need to have some synchronous time with it, you need to meet face to face for something, then it's a different conversation. So all of my coaching with clients, I have clients all over the world that have unlimited one-on-one coaching access to me, is all done asynchronously. I serve clients in 17 time zones currently. I don't have a single Zoom call once every week. I don't have an onboarding call. I don't even do my sales calls as calls. It's all done over, for me, it's Voxer, which is a voice communication tool that some people might be familiar with. But so I have clients I speak to every single day for a minute. And what it means is that if I'm at soccer practice for one of my kids, and I have now 3 kids on 3 travel teams, I can drop a kid off at the field, and while I'm going to park my car, I can listen to a client's concern, think about it, and respond, and then go back to what I'm doing. I can, so asynchronous communication is the silver bullet for productivity, and honestly for managing stuff with a busy family.
Okay, so there are lots of things about that I agree with and I like. One is that asynchronous communication can allow you to think through your thoughts more clearly than synchronous communication. It also is much easier to coordinate in your own schedule than trying to juggle 2 schedules and figure out when you can connect, specifically with really busy people or people that just do a lot of stuff. What situations do you think asynchronous communication fails and synchronous communication is better?
So you bring up a really interesting point, right? So there's some people who are talk to thinkers and some people are think to talkers. I'm gonna answer your question, but I first want to say one of the ways that asynchronous communication works really well for that. So Voxer particularly has been really fascinating. So if you don't know what Voxer is, if people don't know what Voxer is, it's primarily a voice communication tool. Think about like audio messages in iMessage, similar, but it's just a little smoother, I think, and it has some features that work really well that other tools don't have. I have found that as a coach, it used to take me maybe 3 months sometimes or 4 months to really develop trust with somebody, because a lot of the stuff I deal with is not what looks like productivity on the surface. A lot of it ends up being very sort of, between the ears stuff. I find that I can get there in 2 weeks now with Voxer, because it's like somebody is speaking into the ether almost. And like, so Brad, you just cracked your neck while you're starting, right? So like, does that, in my head, should I be like, oh, wait, he's getting bored, so I should change what I'm saying, right? And I know you're not, but when you're synchronous and you're seeing things, like we inevitably have reactions, we change course, we adjust. But I will have people who will just talk for 15 minutes into nothing, and it's almost like a diary that I'm going to read. And people, somebody starts a message talking about the employee that they are frustrated with, and then they go into something that happened with their kid the night before and in their marriage today. And one of the things that you learn in EMS is if you get a patient to keep talking, they will tell you what's wrong with them eventually. Like they'll diagnose themselves if you can get a patient to keep talking. It's the same thing in these situations. So without that feedback, that immediate feedback loop, they fill the space. And some of it's nonsense, but some of it they have to get out of the way. They have to get the nonsense out of the way of the real stuff. So that's one of the things where it works really well. Where it doesn't work as well in some cases, is some of the more like brainstormy, more group kind of things that you would have. And so to me, that's like a great case for a synchronous meeting. You need to get 3 or 4 people in a room. It's still going to be really hard to get 3 or 4 people that are on a very similar like circadian rhythm and can really connect at a high level at the same time. But if you frame it right and you set up the right parameters and guardrails, then that's a situation where it's like, hey, what about this? No, that doesn't work. Okay, but what if we add this to it? Like then you can get that like momentum and that energy. And that's some place where asynchronous does not necessarily work.
I think that there are plenty of people that don't need to talk in order to think. They are really think to talkers, but they're lazy. And it's easier to try to get somebody with them to talk through something than to actually commit the time to thinking through the process. And, your framework of optimize, automate, and outsource, the fundamental of that in the beginning was understand the process better and understand the problem better. And one of the things I do like about asynchronous communication, if you do it thoughtfully, is it necessitates, if you do it thoughtfully, that you actually spend time articulating the message. Now, what I don't like about, a Voxer platform or, fucking iMessages, the audios, is most of the time people just vomit stuff. And then the onus is on me to listen to their rambling narration of their life for 7 minutes. And that feels like a burden. So A, how do you handle that? And B, how do you think about, if you're doing asynchronous communication, how do you think about the boundaries of SLAs? How quickly are you obligated to give a response to that? How do you organize those responses? How do you think about that structure?
So first of all, in Voxer, you can listen at 2, 3, and 4 times speed. So fortunately, right now, my one client that talks the most talks very slowly, so I can listen at 4 times speed, and that's great. I kind of think about it like and also I know my clients well enough that I know when a client, I like before I even open the message, I know it's going to be a tactical question or it's going to be like, I just need a vent. And there's value in that. So I kind of think about it like a podcast sometimes, right? And I'm in the car a bunch, and I'll listen. And what's nice is that if that person were in front of me speaking for 15 minutes straight, it would be very hard for me to not look bored. And that's part of the way my mind works, right? Like I can't. There's just a limit, right?
Yep. I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. But at the same time, I'm then on the spot and expected to give like this amazing answer, right? Because like I'm the guy, I'm the person they're paying for the answer. So what's really interesting for me is that I can listen to a long message like that. So I'll listen to a 15-minute message, in 5 minutes, let's say, if I listen at 3x speed. I can think about it for a little while, and then I can give them the like 30-second answer that was exactly what they needed to hear. And also, there have been many times where I have in my head been like, because my style of coaching, I would say, not in general, but a lot of times is I'm very people like to call it direct, right? But I can be very harsh sometimes because I want to get to a result quickly, and I'm also not going to I'm not going to beat around the bush. So I'll tell somebody when they're acting like an idiot. I'll use better words than that, worse words, depending on how you say it. And it's like I say like you're wrong. You were wrong in the situation. Like you might want to hear like you did okay, but no, this was really wrong, and this is something you need to fix. And then they can sit with that before they respond. But I have definitely had those times where I'm trying to like I'll go through versions of how direct I want to be, or maybe I should take a different approach to this. And it also, honestly, like it allows me to sort of learn some of my own self-management sometimes, right? Because it's like I could have an immediate harsh reaction to something that somebody says, like, oh, that's so stupid. Your employee is a total moron. Like, you should get rid of them right now. And then I go through it, I'm like, all right, well, maybe they were thinking it this way. And maybe the client should be thinking that maybe they were thinking about it this way. So I'm going to give sort of all the different scenarios. It's I always like to say, you can't read the label from inside the jar. This really gives you an opportunity to sort of get outside the jar and figure things out. And then one other thing about that too is that I do a group message every week or so, which is like my private podcast for all my clients, and it usually will provoke some sort of answers. So what's fun with that is that I'll get 2 or 3 clients responding to that privately and be like, oh, I was thinking about this when you sent that message. And sometimes hearing it from multiple clients then gives me sort of an answer that I want to give all of them. So I can like amalgamate that answer. And it's like, oh, wait, they took it this way and that was not how I actually intended it. And then this person took it this way, which was also not how I intended it. So besides clarifying my message, it's like, okay, well now I can address that in this way. It's just giving that space, right? It like gives you that momentary space between stimulus and response, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I like that mechanism. I think there are a lot of different forums for that. One is being deliberate about what you post socially or into any environment, right? Any platform that you want to test a message or see how people are going to respond. You use the construct of your coaching, but I think it's relevant there. One of the things that is a challenge, I think, for lots of entrepreneurs is the sheer volume of shit that ends up on their plate and the sheer volume of things they're trying to navigate. And so there are, I know that I want to talk about your framework for delegation and the 6 levels of delegation.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this will lead into it. But specifically with asynchronous communication, one of the challenges that I have is I'm like, yeah, but I want to get this shit done and get it off my fucking plate right now.
Mm-hmm.
So async, how do you set standards for turn time and like final execution of the task if you're basically recording something asynchronously and saying, hey, this is what the thing is? When do you expect a response? When do people expect a response from you? How do you create that structure?
Yeah, and also I just realized I didn't fully answer your last question, and I can do that really quickly, which is talk about response times. So I purposely I do not set any expectation of response time for my clients. So it's usually within a few hours, but I've gone on vacation for a week and not told anybody, and responded when I got back. When you want to get something off your plate right away, like I want to get this fucking done, like you were saying, outsourcing it is not the right way to do that in most cases, almost all cases, right? So that's where the external brain concept that I talk about comes in. You need to have a place to do that. Your ideas need flow. You need to be able to capture those ideas. It's a rare instance where you're going to be like, I need to do this thing now. I'm going to go outsource it. Like that doesn't usually work unless you already have a really good system set up in place, and it's something very, very small and specific. Like, shit, I got to get this flight booked tonight. Book the flight. Like that's very different. So I'll just touch on external brain really quick. You have to have capture systems all over the place, and that can be emails, it can be voicemails. There's all sorts of tools that we can use. IFTTT is actually really great for bringing that all to one place. I can take a screenshot of my phone. This is one of my favorites, and IFTTT will add that as a Trello card to my list. And then at the end of the day, 8 o'clock at night or whatever, then I can go in and I can sort those ideas, right? So maybe something is something I need to buy. All right, send that to a VA to buy if I was using a VA. This is something I need to tell my wife about. This is something I need to sign up for this. This is a bigger project I need to talk about with my COO tomorrow, right? So you need to have those mechanisms in place.
So let me recap that for people.
Yeah.
This is a phenomenally common situation for entrepreneurs. There's a never-ending to-do list. And I think it's comical when people say things to me like, do you have free time, like to address something? I'm like, the fuck are you talking about? No, there's no free time. There's a never-ending list of shit to do. The question is, what do I want to prioritize right now? And one of the things that people have trouble with is capture. And I love what you just said about taking all of these different capture mechanisms, because in some environments, verbally, spewing something is the easiest way to get it out. In some environments, sending an email is the easiest way to get it out. In some environments, opening the project management tool is the right way to get it down. But I love the idea of using automation platforms to funnel everything into one location. And in your case, that's Trello. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so just to reiterate that a little further even, so like I said, IFTTT is really good for that kind of thing, because like Zapier, maybe now it can, but Zapier and like more complicated things a lot of times don't work with things like smart home devices. So I can do the screenshot on my phone. I can call the IFTTT number and leave a voicemail. I'll usually do that if I'm in the car. We've got the smart home devices all over the place. I can send an email to IFTTT. I can, of course, open up, I can add a Trello card from my lock screen. There's also Whisper Memos, which is a really great iPhone app that has a shortcut for the front. So you hit that, it records your voice, it transcribes it with one of the AI transcription tools is really good. You can even have it summarize it and like flesh it out and then create a Trello card. So like all of these things, like you should never be more than 20 seconds away from capturing an idea, no matter where you are or what you're doing, including in the shower, right? I can reach out the shower and say, so Because we have ideas all the time. And it's one thing to lose a good idea, but what's more often happens is then you're like, oh my God, this is the greatest idea ever. 3 hours later, you've been like on this idea and like, this is the worst idea I've ever had. And now I lost 3 hours of time doing, these things I could have done. But it also is like so much of what I do has been fueled by this idea of not being overwhelmed. Like overwhelm my first like my entry level course is called Overwhelmology, right? And overwhelm is what led to my illness in a lot of ways and stuff like that I was able to get over. So it's so freeing. Like if I'm with the kids or I'm literally like got like the baby in my arm, and it's like, oh my God, I got this idea. Like I got to do something about this. It's really great to be like, hey, blah 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 blah, and I'm like, all right, it's there for later. I can go for it later. The other thing is that we have three very different sets of like neurology. One is the capture, or is the idea, like the ideation brain. A very, very different brain is the one that you want executing on things, right? And in the middle, there's that brain that sorts those ideas and says like, it's the ancient Greeks used to say you should discuss every idea twice, once while you're drunk and once while you're sober. And if they match up, then you can do it. So like entrepreneurs are drunk with ideas all the time, right? It's when we're sober and we can be like, oh yeah, that's a really good idea, and that's gonna or be like, yeah, somebody already did that though, and it didn't work, and this is why, and I don't want to attack that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And I also think that if you don't get the ideas out of your head, they weigh on you. And I think a huge sense of overwhelm is that you've got these ideas ruminating through your brain and they get in the way of effective prioritization. And if you could just get them out and write them down somewhere, you're not going to forget them. They're there, they'll be there later, and then you can focus.
Exactly, and that's huge. And a lot of people, it's a really hard thing for some people. So to get back to your question before about delegation and outsourcing or in timelines and stuff like that. So like I said, I don't have a VA, but I have outsourced stuff consistently over the last couple of years. And my favorite platform for probably a decade now is Fiverr. Fiverr is a gold mine. Not only is it a gold mine for talent, because a lot of those people are on the other platforms as well. I have real issues with like Upwork and Odesk and Guru and all those. I think that they do a really poor job of managing the client interaction, first of all. And I've had a couple like disputes where they've really not done a good job handling those. Fiverr is amazing. And what I particularly like about using Fiverr is you can get a very micro task done, right? So it's not just like set up a CRM. It can be like, I need this one setting changed in WordPress and I don't know how to do it. Here's a guy who will do it. Here's a person who will do it. So the way that I do Fiverr is I will find that thing. And a recent example of this is I was setting up a website for a nonprofit in town that needed to do it for free. So we were using Wix, and with Wix, you can't inherently have a domain name on a Wix site unless you pay, but you can point a domain name to Wix, but it's a little bit more complicated than the normal way of doing it. And I tried to do it, and I messed it up. And so I literally I couldn't figure out how to get the C names right. And this is really annoying because I've done web development since I was literally 12, but like I couldn't figure this out. And my rule is 15 minutes. If I can't figure it out in 15 minutes, I need to take it to somebody else. So I literally went on Fiverr and I searched for C name. And the first thing that pops up is this person like, I will fix your C name issue. Awesome. So the way that I do Fiverr though is I write what I want. So this is the problem. This is what I need done. Here's a screenshot, whatever. And I message the person with that. I will immediately then, so I search for C name, right? So now I immediately go to the next person and the next person, next person. So I will usually do 5 to 7 people immediately with that same cut and paste message, right? So within 90 seconds, 2 minutes, I've messaged 7 people with the same request. And what's great about Fiverr is so by the time I get to that 7th person, 2 people have already responded. Then while I'm talking to that one person, they ask me a question that I hadn't thought of. Now I take that to the one that also responded and I clarify with that information. I kind of play them against each other. What's your budget? I don't know what my budget is for this. You tell me what it is. I can do it for, $50. So then I go to the next person. I'm like, my budget is 25, and then two more people are going to jump into the conversation. One of those people, their communication style is, whether it's a language issue or what, it's just doesn't work for me, right? They're not quite getting it. They're asking questions that I find annoying and that I don't like. That's not going to work. Two people don't respond because they're in a time zone that they just don't work on the same time zone as me. And within 10 minutes, I have basically vetted and almost tested the person that I'm now hire for $10, right? And I not in recent years, but I have in my career, I've hired over a dozen people full time to work for me off of Fiverr using that method. So it's an incredible resource for finding people to do things. And then ultimately, you can also get to that question with them. It's like, I need this done in an hour. Can you do it? No, I can't, but I can do it in 3. Next person, can you do it in an hour? Yes, I can. Okay, but it'll be $5 more. Okay, great. Now I know I got my options.
I've played with all these outsourcing platforms for a whole variety of different things, and we actively use them for lots of different random shit. But I think more important than the platform, the message that I got there was one that I think about all the time. And it is I think a cornerstone of efficiency, which is take all out massive action immediately. And that the biggest mistake people make with trying to get things done quickly is they throw the monkey on somebody else's back. And they think that that's going to be the answer to getting it done. The problem is when that person fails, then you have to start over. And so by starting the game with, I'm not going to go to one person or 2 people, but I'm going to go to 7. And then I'm going to keep the conversation actively moving through that process and reiterate the information back to the group of 7 to get answers from all of them. You get to vet at the same time and increase the tempo to get to your answer much quicker. I love that.
Yeah, and it also, there's that old interview question, like what's something, and I don't ask this question because I find it actually very annoying in that setting. But when people are like, what's something I should have asked you that I didn't, it's like, ask me about my baseball card collection. Like, I don't know. But in this setting, it's really helpful, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, I wouldn't have thought to ask that, because it's not necessarily something I understand. So then I can ask somebody, if like one person responds, they're like, I suggest using this framework. And this actually happened. This was a few months ago. I needed somebody to create a basic dashboard for me. And what I first did was I go online, I'm looking for basic dashboard software. It's like Tableau. And what's the other one that's a big one? I don't remember, but I signed up for an account. I start digging into it. 15 minutes, I'm into it. I've done nothing. That's where I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to this. So somebody responds. They're like, I really like Looker Studio from Google. So I looked at it. I was like, this looks great. So now I can go back and be like, I want you to create a dashboard in Looker. I want you to create a dashboard in Looker. So it's something I had no idea about before. And now I can use that to be a more informed negotiator and delegator in the other conversations.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Okay, this is the interruption where I'm supposed to take money and let somebody else advertise on the podcast, but I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to remind you that I also own easypaydirect.com. And if you're a business that's accepting credit cards or needs to, beyond the fact that we can do a rate review to save you money, beyond the fact that we give you dedicated account reps, world-class customer service, world-class technology, and can actually optimize the way you accept payments online, you should understand why we have thousands of people a year come to us off of platforms like Stripe or PayPal and why they prefer Easy Pay Direct. You can check us out at epd.com/BAM. That's epd.com/BAM.
One of the things you talk about is the 6 levels of delegation. Can you explain that framework to me?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, right, a lot of people approach delegation as a very binary activity, meaning like I do it all or they do it all. And neither one of those is like a great situation for most people. So the 6 levels of delegation basically says like there are gradients to ultimately how much we're empowering people, because that to me is really what outsourcing should be about. It's about empowering people that work with you, not just brushing off shit that you don't want to deal with. So level one is just do it. Just do what I say, rather, right? So that could be like order this book on Amazon with my credit card, like, and that's it. And I don't want your opinion. I don't want you to tell me, oh, I found a sale. I don't want you to ask me anything. Just do this exact thing, right? So no empowerment there, but there's a place for that. Level 4 is you make a decision, but keep me informed, basically. Right. So like you like, what software should we sign up for the dashboard? I'm telling this person like, hey, I trust you to look into it. Just let me know what you decide before we move forward with it, and I can give you the final green light. So a little bit more, a lot more empowering, but ultimately not like autonomous. Level 5 is my favorite, and that's where I operate a lot with people who are on teams with me. And level 5 is you decide within limits. So the limits can be whatever you want, money, time, space, whatever, but money is a common one, right? So one of the rules I had in my company for a long time was if the decision is a $500 or less decision, you don't have to ask anybody, just do it, right? Because I never wanted somebody to have a client complain, that, $300 got missed or whatever, and then they have to wait 3 days because they want to talk to me first if they can refund the money. It's like, no, up to $500, you make a decision. I don't even know about it. That's fine. Really empowering at that point, right? Because it gives somebody a really ample playground kind of to deal with. And then level 6 is just get it done. And level 6 is fascinating. So, and by the way, level 6 is not better than level 1. It really depends on your level of comfort, your ability to communicate, and the person you're communicating to. Not only in level 6 are you saying, I completely trust you. Whatever the result that you produce, I'm going to be okay with. But what it's also saying is I'm recognizing, particularly as a founder or entrepreneur, that in this scenario, any involvement on my part would only hinder the process. So I am stepping out of your way. You do you, boo. Right? And so I had a writer who worked for me for a number of years, Amy, who was amazing and wrote several of my last books. And when she was working with me to begin with, she proved herself very early with her ability to get me and get my writing or get what I wanted. And then she would send me, what do you think of this blog post? And I would respond L6, meaning like, don't fucking ask me. Like, you got this. And what that means is, and she often refers to that as like these moments of growth for her, where it was like, all right, yeah, I can do this, and this is going to be great. And if I didn't like what she produced at that point, it's my fault, not hers. Nothing for her to do, with it. And there were definitely things that I would delegate to her at different levels. But that was something that was like, this is level 6. And then the other thing about that is that there's this idea of the doer. There's a Yiddish word for it, which is a macher, right? Like somebody who gets shit done. You think about there was that. Right, you ever see the show Ray Donovan?
Yes.
Right. So the fixer, right? The guy or the girl who could just fix things.
Damn, I had to dig for that one. I don't know when that came out, but it was
a long time
used.
ago.
Yeah, it was already used, man.
So I have to say, like, so I am that person for a lot of things that I do in life, right? I'm very proud of that aspect of my personality, but there are people who, an organization I work with, where they can call and at any time of day, basically, it's like, this is a problem. How do I fix it? And I will fix it, and I will get it fixed, and I'll figure it out. When you find somebody like that, you should hire that person and have them in your company. But that's another level 6 operation where it's like, this is just the person that fixes the problems, finds the solutions, and that's another level 6 arena. But it really is situation dependent, relationship dependent, and provides a lot more comfort for people to delegate more effectively.
So there are two things. I have a very similar thought process and structure in my life, but also inside the walls of Easy Pay Direct in particular. I will move from one type of delegation to another with a human. Inside of the six levels of delegation framework you have, I'll move from, call it 5 to 6. And meaning I'll say, hey, here's a dollar amount you can run with. And I might set that dollar amount at $200 or $500 or $5,000. But when I do that, I will set it for a period of time for revision. And it's a super important structure for me, because one of the things that I find, not only with delegation, but with tons of things in business when you're trying to do a lot of stuff, is it's very easy to put a system in place and then find it 2 years later and be like, fuck, I've been doing that for 2 years? Shit, I meant to change that. That's number one. The other is that you can have level 6 delegation on certain tasks with certain people that under no circumstances could they be a level 6 delegation task in a different arena.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it's important to have that delineation and not say, oh, this person, because not everybody's the fixer. Not everybody's, look, if they were, they'd probably be doing their own thing. Maybe. But it's very uncommon to find people that are just good at everything. And if they are, they're probably accelerating in life on their own, just owning their shit. So the question is, what are they good at? Under what circumstances can I fully be hands off and say, you do whatever you do to get it done. I fully trust you. How do you go about assessing who is right to be in those different categories of delegation?
That's how I want to attack that. So we'll say one of the things is that I think that entrepreneurs and founders and CEOs in general have to do a better job of being a sorter. So sorting things, right? So like hot potato. A lot of times they hold on to things for too long, right? We need to be able to identify a problem or a task or an idea, whatever, quickly, and then hand it off to the right person with the right information. And that's a skill that a lot of leaders need to develop more of. And in doing so, sometimes you do get to see where people falter or not. We also have to create a culture in general where people are okay with failure and learning from failure. There's a Mitsubishi method from the 30s or 20s that I always like to implement in companies, which is called the 5 whys. So like WHY, right? So if a problem occurs, you ask, why did that happen? And then you ask, well, why did that happen? And then why did that happen? And you go 5 degrees deep, essentially. And then they are supposed to come up with their own solution based on that. And in my VA company, we had a policy that if there was a not even like an actual failure, but if there was a client interaction that didn't go well for some reason, if the VA presented us with the 5 whys form, and we had a jot form for this, before we heard anything from the client, like there was a reward for that. So like identify that there was a problem and identify a solution, find your own solution, but make that a systemic part of how we operate, right? So if something goes wrong, you don't try to figure out how to cover up. You don't, get defensive. You actually find the way that we make that better so it doesn't happen again. And like, then you're absolved essentially. And then the other one is that I always want to see how people perform at their worst. With writers, particularly like creative work, coders, things like that. It's always fascinating to me and I've interviewed probably 2,000 people in my life. It's always fascinating when somebody's like, give me a sample of your work, give me a sample of your writing, right? They're going to give you a piece of writing that has gone through 7 drafts that their college professor, like polished for them, and that's going to be their best work. What I always like to do is, like when I was hiring copywriters, for example, here is a shitty piece of copy. Make it better. Make it better now. Right? This WordPress site is not working. How would you fix it? Right? That's how you test people really, really quickly. Not only to see if they actually can solve the problem, but to see how they handle being presented with the problem in the first place.
Yeah, I love that. I think that we have everybody that we bring on for Easy Pay Direct, and this applies to other businesses that I'm a part of as well. We have some sort of functional test, and they vary across the board in terms of what we're trying to test on. But part of the test is not just the competency of whether or not you can do it; it's how you approach it. And so, like one of the tests that we run for all frontline new employees for Easy Pay Direct is we ask them to write an SOP on how to use our software, our gateway. Well, 2 things. One, there's a demo account you can sign up for online, so you can go in and use it. 2, we've literally already written the SOP and it is posted online. So if your approach is, I don't know, how the hell would I know that? Well, it means you didn't take the basic initiative to Google this shit because it's literally like the first or second result.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Right. So I think that mechanism I think tests are a really, really good opportunity to see how people behave, not just how they perform. But that's cool. I love that approach.
Well, and so the other thing though is also I have 4 questions I always ask in interviews, only 4. So the first 2 are easy, the second 2 are not. So the first 2 is why you, second one is why us, right? Relatively simple, but like, why us is sometimes a little harder than why you. The third question is, I want you to tell me about a time that you screwed up at work and how you handled it. And in that one, a lot of times what I'm really trying to look for is a lot of like collaborative we kind of language. So not like, I was late on something, so I stayed up late and got it done for the client. I love to see more like this thing happened, so I came to a peer and brought them in to help me with this, and then I actually ended up outsourcing part of this to somebody on Fiverr to help me get it done in time. Like, you collaborate. The fourth question, though, which is my favorite, is if we do not hire you, why do you think that will be? Which is such a gut check for people. And most people fail that question miserably, because what that question is asking you to do is have a little bit of self-awareness about how you showed up in the interview. So like for me, a great answer to that for me personally would be to be fair, like I've had a long decades to prepare this, right? But a great answer for me would be, I know that I probably come off as somebody who's kind of a lone wolf and likes to do their own thing, run their own show, and doesn't take direction very well. I know that is how I show up. But I've worked on teams where I have been in this position and that position. I've collaborated on this, and I really can get it done, no matter where I'm at in the chain. But I know that this is how I show up. So that's a great answer. Somebody who's like, oh yeah, well, there's probably just so many great applicants and maybe I just didn't stand out. It's like, yep, you got that one right.
That's great. Those are great questions. When we make change in a process or system, there are a whole litany of different areas that the change has to happen. But the starting point really is changing procedure and then adding it to training. And you can't expect to change procedure and not add it to training and expect it to just work, right? Like you have to put it in training right away.
Memorialize it.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like, well, even if you memorialize in an SOP, like that's not good enough, because you really need to indoctrinate the process before you can expect it to execute appropriately in the future. And like, it's fine if you have a really small team and you're not growing, but if you expect to hire new people, like you're setting yourself up for the same fucking problem 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months from now.
Well, and it's been really interesting, actually, particularly working in this rescue squad, because you just naturally have a lot of turnover in an EMT organization, and especially a volunteer one, right? So like we know that we have people, it's like a revolving door, and we have members who've literally been here for 40 years and members who are here right now and may leave in 6 months because it's not for them, right? So, and protocols have changed and all sorts of stuff. So it's a constant not pick up, not like catch up, but it's just like something I have to stay on top of all the time, because it's, as vice president, it's kind of become my responsibility. One of the things I implemented last night, and I already put somebody through this, which I never thought of doing before, but this kid, and he is a kid, I was like, you got an email in the recruiting process that explained what these requirements were. Do you remember it? And he's like, if I'm being really honest, he's like, I kind of remember it. And he's like, I may have just sort of skimmed over it. And I was like, I totally appreciate your honesty on that. That's great. But so what I did was I made a video where I'm like, all right, we're about to, you've completed all the requirements. Your membership is ready to start. There's one last thing I need you to do. I need you to record a video saying what your name is and that you understand that these are the following responsibilities that you will have as a member. And then I listed them. And I just had a guy do it in a video. And he's like, all right, my name is this. I understand that I have to do these hours and this meeting and this thing. So it's in video. With them saying it. So it's not so much a gotcha, because I mean it would be at some point if I'm like, look, you recorded the video. It's also, though, for them, I think it reinforces it to like say it out loud, record it, and hopefully that helps. I think that'll actually help a lot.
Okay, well, I've got a bunch of other things I want to ask you, but because we've got a time constraint here, I have to ask you about. We do for me. I am unfortunately back to back today.
No free time.
Yeah. We need to work on my efficiency internally. Maybe I'll listen to this episode again and try to implement some stuff. I want to hear about, I kicked this off by talking about a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, which is incurable, as is, prescribed by the medical community. You went through a series of things that left you in a position of having no signs of Crohn's anymore. First question is that just a good hook for your marketing, or do you actually have no signs of Crohn's?
I actually have no signs. So I went for a colonoscopy last year for the first time in 10 years. And I always loved this experience. I mean, it hasn't happened that much in the last 10 years because this was the first time I've done this. But the doctor's going through my history, and I say like I had Crohn's disease, and it's like literally like the record scratches, and he's like, "What do you mean you had Crohn's disease? You can't." I was like, well, "I had it. I don't have it anymore." And he's like, "Well, I just want to manage expectations. Even if you're feeling better, you probably still have clinical signs because it's really not curable." I was like, "Okay, let's do the test." And to his credit, he did the colonoscopy, and he said to me, he said, "If you had not told me about your history, I would not have known." So that's supposed to be impossible. And not only is it not impossible, but I've replicated my results in a whole bunch of other people. It doesn't, not everybody. I mean, there's some people who really struggle with it forever, but ultimately I found that stress was like one of the biggest components of the illness. And it is with a lot of inflammatory conditions. And it's probably one of the reasons why it inordinately affects Jews. Like we just carry around so much neuroses all the time. But yes, I have no signs of it at all. Nothing that would show that I have Crohn's disease.
What tests through the process of fixing yourself physically, what tests did you do routinely, and what actions did you do to correct that?
So I did a lot of blood testing. I was getting blood because of the medicines that I was on initially, which I probably wouldn't be alive if it weren't for those medicines. So I'm not anti-medicine. I needed those medicines to be able to get the space to do this. The problem is a lot of times people get on medicines, they don't make the lifestyle change that they need to make. So I was getting blood tests like every 5 weeks. So there's a lot of data that I had to sort of manually put in Excel and sift through at the time and see what had correlations to what. And I'll be completely honest, some of those correlations may have been completely spurious. Like I'm just, might have just been guessing. But what it did for me was it made me feel more in control. And that is not to be discounted, because what often happens in a health journey is that people become passengers.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not just that becomes a psychological issue, and it becomes a physical issue. The idea of taking control and ownership over my journey and over my data and saying okay, I'm going to try this new supplement and I'm going to see if I find a correlation, has a real effect on how your body deals with those situations. So control to me is the antidote to stress in many situations. And particularly with an autoimmune disease, when you feel like you're at war with your own body and the enemy is always inside you, right, waiting to pop out, that's really hard. Depression and suicide are highly correlated with people with Crohn's disease. So there's a lot of blood testing. There was all sorts of weird ones. I did DEXA scans, which now are so much more common, but the dual X-ray absorptiometry, you get all the specific breakdowns. I did, because of the Ironman stuff, I was doing VO2 max tests. Initially, when I started to train for Ironman, the coach that I brought on didn't want to work with me because she was afraid that it was going to re-trigger the Crohn's.
Sure.
And I kind of I convinced her, and I took on the ownership of that. And it didn't, but there were definitely extreme things I was having my body do at some times, and it didn't trigger it. So to see that lactic acid thresholds, things stool testing, genetic testing, all sorts. I mean, you name it. I did kind of everything. But the most valuable in some ways was HRV tracking, believe it or not, which is now so commonplace, but really wasn't at the time. But the idea of tracking the resilience state of your body and your nervous system, because day to day you could see changes in that depending on things that you did.
Can you explain heart rate variability for people?
Yeah, right. So you think about a rubber band kind of as the variability, and you want it to be able to stretch more and more and more, but also, and then come back to its original state, right? That sort of elasticity. So heart rate variability is a number usually between 1 and, well, I think if it was 1, you'd be dead, but it's between 1 and 100. And the higher it is, the more variability you have, which means that your nervous system is more able to be fight and flight and then come back to center. Fight and flight and come back to center. And you want more and more of that variability. And it's something you can train. There's ways to train it. There's breathing exercises, all sorts of things. But also sleep has a big effect on it. Stress, obviously, some of the things we eat have a big effect on that. It's really interesting. I generally, I know this is going to sound weird. It's not because I'm like Brian Johnson. I'm trying to do this. A lot of times I end up eating dinner before 5 p.m. Because the kids get home from school, and a lot of people I think like to do like snacks after school and stuff, which we have definitely done. But my wife has gotten in the habit of basically making dinner. So when the kids get home starving, they can have a big meal and then they can have like a snack or two later. So a lot of times I'll have dinner with them at that point, and then I just don't eat later on. The other night we had friends over, and we had dinner at like 8 o'clock, and my Aura ring the next morning was like, "Did you have a late meal? Your heart rate took a lot longer to come down to like baseline than normal." So normally like my lowest heart rate is like 2 in the morning, and apparently this time it was like at 6. So that doesn't matter. That's not going to hurt me right now, but like it's a very like immediate sort of indicator sometimes when things are going wrong. And when you are stressed out for a really long time and you're unhealthy for a really long time, your variability gets lower and lower and lower and stays there, and that's very scary.
Awesome. That's super helpful. So there's a huge gap between a lot of unknown ailments and conditions that entrepreneurs find themselves in, and people in general, in Crohn's, right? But there is no question that a whole host of things cause inflammatory responses in humans. And we don't seem to be very good at handling it in general, certainly as a medical community,
Yeah.
or the U.S. economy doesn't do a very good job of reducing inflammation, diet, and all sorts of other shit. As an entrepreneur, what advice do you have for us to drive and produce in a way that lots of entrepreneurs want to, and avoid wrecking your body physically and burnout and insane inflammation?
Human beings are really good at just pushing harder and digging faster and doing more, right, until we can't. And that's often the solution. I think entrepreneurs sort of take that into like hyperdrive many times, right? So even, you have like Elon Musk, as you mentioned before, he just said that he's doing 120 hours a week with Doge, right? Like that's not sustainable without drugs, which I guess he uses because he's talked about that, but which is also not sustainable at some point, right? And I'll be honest, there are people who I've seen, and I think he's probably one of them, where it's like, I just want to get as much output as I possibly can in the time I have on Earth. Whether that's a year or 10 years, like I'm just going to get as much out of that as I possibly can. That's not my approach, right? So that really it's harder to stop and take your head out of the water and be like, should I actually go in that direction? Right? I'm going to stop for a second and I'm going to lose. It's actually in Ironman. This is really funny. So, or not really funny. I got punched in the back of the head in Ironman in the swim.
I think it's pretty funny.
Yeah. So it's the Ironman swim is really aggressive. Like people have been kicked in the face. Like it's like sharks, right? And I got punched in the back of the head. I boxed for a number of years, right? And I got punched in the back of the head, and I was like, it shook me for a second. I was like, nope, it's okay. And I stopped for a second and I got my bearings and I kept going. And in the swim, particularly, I was swimming it was Ironman France, so it was in the Mediterranean. You learn and you train to, you have your head to the side, but then you bring your goggles up right above the water just to make sure that you're still going towards the buoy. Entrepreneurs don't tend to not do that, right? It's like, I'm just going to keep going that way. And it's the difference between further and farther, right? Farther being a measure of distance and further being a measure of degree, right? So like we can go deep right here, or we can go farther in a direction. And if you lose sight of that, then you've lost sight of that. And so that's the first thing is like to have that wherewithal to stop and ask yourself frequently, like, is this the right thing to keep working on this way? And like I said, I have my 15-minute rule. Like it's very rare that I will, and I recognize you could be like, oh, well, that's crazy ADHD. It's not. It's a recognition that if I spend more than 15 minutes on something, there is going to be a diminishing return, diminishing, economies of scale at that point. And I need to give that to somebody else or build an automation or whatever and move on to something else. So that's one, is sort of having that self-awareness. The other one is prioritizing your health in any way that you can. And that might sound very obvious, but I'll give you an example. My sleep is shitty. Okay. So I have kids. One night a week, I work an overnight shift on the ambulance, for 12 hours or 8 hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah. So my sleep is shitty. And last night, my wife and I were talking about this, and she was getting frustrated because I was like tired and I couldn't remember like a conversation that we had had. And she's like, "You need sleep." I was like, "What do you want me to do?" I was like, "I'm going to sleep at 10:30, like the aura says, and I'm getting up at 6:30, whatever." But in between, there was like 7 wake ups according to the ring. The dog needed to go out, the baby came to our bed, the baby, like there's always something. So that's not something I can rely on. So what does that mean? I don't drink. I never drink alcohol. I used to, never to excess, but I used to. But now I don't, because it's not worth it to me to screw up my sleep even more for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we had friends over the other night, big wine drinkers. I was like, I can't. She's like, "Are you working on the ambulance?" I was like, "No." I was like, I don't want to fall asleep in the middle of our conversation. So, and I don't want to make, like, I'm functional, obviously, like I'm doing fine. But that's because I eat really well. I don't drink. Sleep is just something that's not in the cards for me right now. And then the other thing is that, and this is a real hard one for me to swallow, but I did Ironman. I was doing CrossFit for a long time. I could deadlift 350 pounds at one point. Now a workout for me is like 20 minutes of stretching, and I'm not 60, I'm 43. So to me, it's like, no, I should be able to be lifting, but I also do an average of 17,000 steps a day. Right. So I'm always moving. I feel great. I'm in a good weight. My blood markers look really good, but doing a hard workout is just not something in the cards for me right now. And that has to be okay. So that's what a lot of it is, and especially when you're seeing on Instagram, the people who are like getting up at 5 a.m. and putting their face in a bowl of ice, and then they go run 50 miles and stuff. It's like, that might work for them. So biohacking is about figuring out what works for you.
I think there's a big element of this idea that you can have everything you want in life. You just can't have it all at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. You can choose to, be an endurance athlete and run 50 miles or 100 miles. You cannot simultaneously be a power lifter. You physically can't do that. And I think the story there of recognize what those things are. And if you want to optimize, just be really clear on what you're optimizing for and know what some of the trade-offs are. And that can be very, very hard. And some of that is ego for entrepreneurs. Some of it is ignorance. And I'm sure there are a million other reasons.
And also, like, your fitness or your health really should serve the functions that you need in life, right? So like, I need to be able to lift a 250-pound patient off the floor, right? Like, I need to be able to do that, and I can totally do that, no problem. 350 pounds, I'm going to ask somebody for help and be okay with that too, because some people won't. Half the EMTs in the world have back problems. I want that if, at 9 o'clock at night, my daughter's like, I've got a lot of energy, I want to go play. I need to be able to do that. But I don't need to be able to lift 400 pounds. Like, I don't need to be able to run, I can run a 26-minute 5K right now. I don't need to run a 22-minute 5K, because that would require a very significant change in the way I do things.
Yeah, minimum effective dose. I like that. Ari, I've got a million other questions and I have to run. So until next time, in the meantime, where do you want to point people? Where can people find out more about Ari Meisel?
Well, everything is at lessdoing.com for the most part. But also, I always like to tell people, you can go to voxwithari.com, VOXWITH Ari, so ARI.com. It's a short YouTube video, explains what Voxer is and how I use it. And then reach out. And I really do mean that. You reach out and it will be me. It will not be an automation. It will not be a VA. You're going to hear my voice. And tell me your productivity challenges. Tell me your business growth challenges. I always like to hear them and learn.
Awesome. Love it, man. Thanks so much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for checking out this Beyond a Million episode. It occurred to me just now that I never tell people to leave comments, and that's probably really stupid. I should tell you to leave a comment. So if you have any questions, or you liked the show, or you hated the show, it would be awesome if you would leave a comment. It makes a big difference in helping other people find it. Leave a comment below.